Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, is my good friend, my co-host, Matt. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
Mark, I'm doing great, man. I am doing really great. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great as well, man. We were talking off camera earlier. I've got my new rig set up here, even though we don't do video. I wish we did video now that I got my rig set up, that I can use my fancy camera as a webcam. So I'm a happy camper. I've been working on trying to get this set up to work, and technology and I we just don't get along sometimes.
I don't know. You get along with technology a lot better than I do.
Oh man. So I got it figured out. So it's working. So I have a feeling that maybe somewhere during the middle of this podcast, my video is going to shut down completely, but as long as we have audio, we're okay. Right. So, but yeah, so I'm doing really good, man. I'm happy to be back and happy to be doing this show. We've got a great guest. I'm really looking forward to this one. But before we jump into that, Matt, I will thank our sponsors. And of course, that's the Stave Restaurant out in Millville, Kentucky. Eric and Rebecca Burnworth that own that place. They're just wonderful people. We really appreciate their support. Chef Jonathan Sanning, the chef out there, features an elevated Kentucky cuisine. It's just, it's fantastic. We love it out there. You can buy bottles out there as well, which is really cool. So you can pick up some bourbon, take that home with you. So check them out. And then also Pinhook Bourbon, our other sponsor. So we're happy to have them on board, and they're doing some great stuff as well. And that's their stuff is distilled at Castle and Key, which can it's good stuff. And they've been putting out their own distillate this year. So check them out online at pinhookbourbon.com. So Matt, with that said, tell everybody who we have with us tonight.
Absolutely. I'd love to. We have with us live. Well, Mark, you and I have.
You always say that we're live. We're not live. I know. It's a recorded podcast.
We don't ever record. We don't ever release these things live. I got to stop that. Anyway,
come on, Matt. Man,
Mark and I are together, and we have joining with us from Widow Jane Distilling, Lisa Wicker, the lead distiller. Lisa, welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have the invitation. And I'm sorry, we're talking about being technologically challenged. And thank you for postponing after I couldn't get my act together.
Lisa, like Matt was saying off camera, it happens, and it happens to us quite often, especially using this. I mean, we love Squadcast. If it weren't for Squadcast, the podcast would not be going at this point. So we really, appreciate all that they do for us and the service they provide. But I will tell you, when you're trying to line up 3 or 4 different people on 3 or 4 different computers with different microphones and everything, sometimes it just happens. So we appreciate your flexibility and coming back because you're actually traveling. You're on the road. It's great. You're calling in from a hotel somewhere in the middle of Maryland, I believe you said. So yeah.
Yeah, 8 hours from Lexington, I think I am at right now. 9 hours from Bardstown, yeah. So.
Wow. Well, hopefully you'll have safe travels tomorrow, and you'll make it back to the Bluegrass State and make it back home for a little while. That'd be great. Yeah. So, Lisa, we've never had the opportunity to meet before. So, but one thing I wanted to say is funny because I kind of put show notes together just so we have that. And the things, everything I was looking at, I noticed you refer to yourself as lead distiller, not master distiller. So I just wanted to say, what's your, it's kind of an odd question to start with, but I didn't want to say, okay, you're the lead distiller if you're really the master distiller. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. My boss told me that I could take the title of master distiller, but the more that I learn, I was a commercial winemaker for 10 years before I started distilling 10 years ago. And I used to say, once you master these 5 things, I used to think, oh my gosh, when I was learning to make wine, if I can just learn these next 5 things, I'm going to be doing really well, only to find out each one of those 5 things has its own 5 things.
All right.
It just keeps, and it's still at this point in my career, it just keeps expanding. My mentor is Dave Sherrick. And the gentleman that put Woodford Reserve back together, he and his wife did built the house across the road, and he started there when it was LeBroat and Graham, and Brown Forman had just purchased it and spent the next 16 years, putting it back together. And we've had several conversations because tidal inflation or whatever you want to call it, but
Right.
that he's a true master distiller, right? And he said, you're not really a master distiller until you know what to do with the oh shits. So he told me not too long ago, maybe a year or so ago, he said, it's okay. It's okay if you go ahead and take the title. And I'll tell you what, there'd been 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I would have just grabbed at it, right? And said, oh my gosh, this is great. And
Sure.
the more that you learn, the more respect I have for the old guard. And, I'll do that one of these days, but it just seems like too much responsibility.
Right. So it's a way of paying tribute somewhat to the guys that have been in the process for a while, but it's also a way, it sounds like maybe you can shirk some responsibility, Lisa, possibly.
The responsibility still follows me around.
Yeah. It catches up with you regardless of what you call yourself, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I call myself a co-host on this podcast, because I don't have the clout to take all the heat here.
Oh man. Well, I'll tell you what, Lisa, real quick, because Matt and I have a bad habit, and I say this every episode, but we do have a bad habit. We start talking and we forget to talk about what we're drinking. So
I've gotten through a complete podcast and we've still had like 5 glasses of whiskey and we've all been drinking whiskey the whole time. I like to help sell this stuff, right?
Yeah. So what we've got here, well, I tell you what, we decided we're going to start with your American oak aged whiskey that's distilled from a rye mash. But would you care just to kind of tell everybody a little bit about what we're drinking here this first round?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked to start with this. No one ever asked to start with this. And so this is great because sometimes these are the whiskeys that get left off the end of the tasting list because we are up to how many products now? We've got the 10-year,
right.
The Lucky 13. We had the 12-year. We had the Vaults 14. Vaults 15 is getting ready to get released. And so the product line is expanded. And so the ryes were like the last thing that I had taken care of, and I'm still working on them actually. It's sourced rye, it's straight rye. The label doesn't reflect that. We just did a label audit recently for what we need to do going forward as far as updating our labels. They used to vat it before I started there, and I decided to start blending it 5 barrels at a time, just like I do the 10-year. Because we add staves to source whiskey and finish that maturation process in Red Hook in Brooklyn, sometimes some of the barrels will over extract a little bit. Some of them will not be quite where they are. And so blending them out, I can get them at this place where that the oak influence is there.
Sure.
We've been laying rye down. We actually have some straight rye and Red Hook that we laid down there, and kind of like watch for that, and I got plans coming forward. And then I've laid lots of barrels of rye down at Castle and Key as well.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now this is at least 2 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, so it's whiskey distilled from a rye mash. So it's not. Explain that, if you would.
Yeah, they labeled it that before it was straight. And now we have straight rye, and like I said, it's time for us to.
Okay.
We've been so busy. Michelle Clark is our vice president and director of art and operations, and she does all of our artwork, all of our labeling, all of our amazing branding. I don't know if you've seen our short films that we started releasing. And yeah, she does all this really cool stuff. And so we just quite frankly haven't gotten to it yet. It's after the first of the year, we're pushing out so much product right now that I'm blending I can't even tell you how much I blended this week. And the warehouse crew, I pulled the 2 distillers off at distilling and actually shoved them out in the warehouse because we're doing really well. So
is this then the mash bill on this one? Is it a 95.5, or can you say what it is, or is that? I saw somewhere it said
here's two sides of the coin. There's so many people that are like, oh, you're so secretive about the mash bill. Sometimes when you're working with a broker, you're not allowed to disclose the mash bill.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't aware of that. They think that people are trying to cover something up, and it's just it's a gentleman's agreement between your supplier and especially if there's a broker in the middle.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, we completely understand it. I'd seen something when I was doing a little bit of work and looking at Widow Jane and the products, and I saw a statement somewhere that said mostly rye grain with a touch of barley. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, 95.5. So we'll leave my conclusion at that point. You don't have to confirm or deny.
That's right.
So Matt, I see you over there. You've been sniffing on this one and tasting it. So what do you pick it up on this?
I get a lot of really nice rye grain on the nose.
Yeah.
That really nice graininess. And I get like oranges, orange peel, something like a citrus and like a fruitiness to it.
Yeah. What about the palate? What do you get on the taste?
Well, I haven't tried it yet.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, I get you talked about the rye spiciness. I do obviously pick that up. But again, and we've had a couple of ryes in the past, and when you think of one that's going to be we won't say what the mash bill is, but when it's a higher rye, you just automatically anticipate that it's going to be extra spicy. But this one has a lot of sweetness to it, and that really kind of surprised me when I took that first taste. Was that I you get that rye spiciness, but I just pick up a lot of sweetness to it. Which is really nice. So Lisa, what about you? I mean, this is your stuff. So tell us, I mean, if you don't care, share with us what you get on the nose and the taste on it.
No, you guys are pretty accurate on that. In fact, when for this summer, for the first time, I started pouring this over some ice on the really hot days. And the thing that surprised me the most, it was like lemon lime.
Oh yeah. I can see that. The citrusy. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. When you're talking about the orange and the lemon but people are always surprised if, so many people are like, I don't like rye whiskey. It's like, just try this. And they're surprised how much softer and sweeter it is than, I love rye whiskey. So I like the whole spectrum of rye whiskey. Right. And,
so does Matt.
Yeah, right. I do.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get the really green, herbaceous, green, grassy, rye. All those have their place. Everything's, but there's something about us doing the additional time on this oak staves that definitely sweetens it up and softens it up. We get them from a cooperage, and most of our cooperage comes out of Athertonville, Kentucky. It's Zach Cooperage, but these.
Oh yeah, okay.
These staves actually come out of Minnesota.
Okay, so these have the staves. So you're putting the staves, like, are you attaching them to the lid or putting them in the barrel, or how?
Popping the bung out and putting them in.
Dropping them in. Okay.
Dropping them in and letting them stay. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Yeah. But so Matt, now that you've tasted it, what else are you getting over there?
Oh, the taste is really good. I got a lot of caramel. And like we were saying, it's got a really nice spice at the start, and then it's super sweet.
It is.
It's really sweet, like really caramel and toasted sugar. And the finish is awesome. I really, really like the finish. It's got a really nice peppery, tingly, like a good bold finish. I love
that. I love that tingle, man. When your tongue just starts tingling a little bit, and it lingers. I mean, this lingers really nicely. So I'm very, I don't want to say I'm surprised. I don't mean it that way, but I'm
you can be surprised. Okay.
I mean, because when you see something, you think, 2 years old or right around 2 years old, and I know rye is different than bourbon. But you get that, you kind of have a preconceived notion that, you might be a little flat on the flavor, or you might pick up the grains a lot more than you would in something that's been aged a little bit longer. But this one drinks older than a 2 year plus rye, I think. I mean, for sure. So I really, really like this one. And it's funny because now I'm starting to pick up just a hint of black tea on the taste.
Absolutely. A little bit of floral. Yeah, there's a little floral note.
Yeah. It's funny because I love it when I can pick that, and it's not, we were at Wilderness Trail, and we did a thing with them, and we were drinking their rye, and the barrel, it was a single barrel, but I was picking up that same black tea. And sometimes when I get that, I get that tannic drying effect as well. But with this, I don't get that at all. that sweetness carries over. So I get a little hint of black tea, but it's not a tannic drying effect as well with that, which is great. So
Thank you.
very nice.
Did you see Wilderness Trail made Jeopardy yesterday?
Really?
Oh,
They
yeah.
were pretty.
I did not see the episode, but Haley, who's their PR marketing digital media person, she was our guest on the podcast that's coming out actually next week. But she had posted the screenshot of Wilderness Trail Distillery in the blue box as an answer on Jeopardy. So I didn't know how in the world or what it was, but did you actually see it? Did you see the show?
No, I didn't. I just saw Pat Heist. Dr. Heist had put that
Isn't that funny?
on his feed. It's like, oh my gosh, it's incredible.
That's great. So Lisa, we've never met. And now if I know the person I'm talking with, that we're talking with on the show, I always like to say, yeah, I know this person, we've met this way, but we've actually never met before. So this is nice to get to finally meet you. But can you tell our listeners just kind of, you talked a little bit briefly about your background, but just so people know, because you've done a lot of pretty amazing stuff and worked at a lot of pretty cool places. So can you kind of share that with everybody?
Yeah. I try to figure out a way to explain it so it's a little bit more interesting because, it can be kind of as news, right? And I was a commercial winemaker in Brown County, Indiana for 8 years, is where I learned to make wine and apprenticed the winemaker there. Then when my youngest daughter was graduating from high school, I had an offer to go to Kentucky. It was time for me to go out on my own and I couldn't figure out what to do. And I got an offer from an existing vineyard that we'd actually purchased grapes from at Brown County. And they decided they were going to add a winery. And my boss just kind of offhand said, well, you need to hire Lisa. She's good to go. Right. And so they didn't know they hired me as a consultant. They didn't know I was willing to move. I didn't know I was willing to move until they, and so, to build a winery with an existing vineyard is, a rarity, especially in the middle part of the country. And so I took that opportunity. I wanted to learn to distill too. The gentleman that taught me to make wine, make wine all day and we drank whiskey. And he's the one that really taught me whiskey. And we'd always have these conversations about distilling and how cool it'd be to distill. And at one point in time, he and his son and I were the production team. And at one point in time, we made a proposal to his wife. And she's like, you three, no, absolutely not. Because we made a proposal about getting a still. We had a couple of fire incidents. She's like, oh no, not the three of you. She's a wise woman. She's a very wise woman. And so I was thinking, okay, great, this is good. I can, so I was building the winery in Marion County, Kentucky, where Maker's Mark is, right? And, thought, well, this is great. I wiggled my way on the legislative committee for one of the Kentucky wine associations and thought, oh, good, I can get a brandy still. And I can learn to distill here because there's so much knowledge here, right? This is the best place to do this. Well, during that time, the owners of the winery decided to go through a very spectacular divorce. And yes, and so I saw the writing on the wall, unfortunately, because we came out of the chute like really well. We had some strong metal contenders immediately. And we were really, so I was making wine in a retrofitted barn while we were building the building. And during that time, I met Steve Beam. And so the joke that Steve had a building and no license, I had a license and no building, and we were each other's extra set of hands. He'd come help me. He helped me on one incredibly bitter cold night. The TTB, I had to move all the wine from the existing barn after I got the winery built, and they gave me a 48-hour window to move all the wine. And so we were having to pump it into tanks on a flatbed truck. Cover it with nitrogen so no oxygen got into the wine and get it transferred, and everything was freezing and we were having to tear the tanks down. And Steve, God bless him, hung in there with me. And it was Steve and my foreman and I, and there were some tears. It's cool. So we got it done, and so we helped each other out with those kind of projects. But then because I'd had some blending experience with wine and he did not, we started blending whiskeys in the evenings. And that's really, it was just so much time to do some trial and error, and everything that I learned, like blending for wine didn't necessarily translate to spirits, so that part was really, priceless. And so when the owners looked like the winery wasn't going to stay together because of their marriage. And so I booked a ticket to California. I thought, well, I'm going to have to go to California and work a harvest. And I'll come back to Kentucky and regroup and figure out what I'm going to do. And Steve and Paul Beam took me to dinner the day after I resigned the winery and hired me full-time for Limestone Branch.
Wow, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, so I got my foot in the door for distilling a lot faster than I thought. It was baptism by fire. We worked 60, 80-hour weeks for 3 years. Yeah, it was just insanity, right? There's times you get done at 1:30 in the morning and realize you have to be back in the plant at 7. Or get in your truck and your clothes are soaking wet and it's 9 degrees outside. It's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Or, sit in the plastic Adirondack chair watching the still. It's like 2:00 in the morning and Steve texts you and says, I saw a flash in the sky. Are you okay? I'm like, what if I hadn't answered that,
Yeah, seriously. Come on.
Blowing up your distillery or something. So yeah, it's a crazy, crazy run there. A lot of product development for, client work, all kinds of insanity. We went through an arson fire together there, and then Luxco purchased them. I got fired.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. They bought controlling interest in the distillery and I was the number 2 guy. Right. So,
right.
If I'd bought a place, I wouldn't want, 2 people from the other place either. So anyway, proverbial blessing in disguise. I had an offer in the next 24 hours from a distillery in South Carolina. And I countered with consulting because I didn't want to leave Kentucky. I had to learn. And so they countered with consulting. I started doing that. And then Ted Huber found out I was in the market. And I'd known Ted for years because of winemaking. And actually, Dave Sherrick was having a conversation. Ted's like, I need a new distiller. And Sherrick's like, I know this woman. She might be good. And he told Ted, Ted's like, oh my God, I know Lisa for years. And so I distilled for Ted and actually I had another offer in the middle of that for an amazing distillery, very well-known craft distillery, very well respected, and couldn't believe I had 2 offers. Right. And so Ted and Dana knocked that offer out of the park, not necessarily monetarily, but what I was going to be allowed to do. And so we, Ted's a crazy man. He's great. And we had a rum project that got out of hand and, nice. He'd send his dog down because I was distilling 6 days a week. So he'd send his dog down to keep me company on Saturdays. And, it's just such a nice family atmosphere. I thought I'd distill for them forever. And he and Dana are 2 of the nicest people to walk the face of the earth. And then Drew Colsveen, I was at an event, actually my oldest daughter and son-in-law, and that's a whole nother story, how they ended up in Bardstown. And Drew's like, Lisa, hey, you want to come back to Bardstown? I'm like, what have you got? What are you talking about? And a work friend of theirs that they'd known for years decided to build the first craft distillery in Bardstown. So I was the general manager for that project and was going to stay on as distiller of that project, and left there and started my own consulting business after a couple years there. So my son kept telling me, he's like, Mom, you're going to be bored. If you stay on this distillery, you're going to be bored out of your skull. No, it's good. I'll settle down. It's just a few minutes from home.
Right. Yeah, sure.
And so then I start my consulting business. I have a couple clients. In fact, I'm going to go see some of my former clients when I'm home. Robert Furness Rowe called me from Sampson and Surrey. Before that, Peter Cressy had called me, and Dr. Cressy used to be head of Discus, right? And he spends his retirement in the library at Mount Vernon. And I've been the consulting distiller for George Washington's distillery for Mount Vernon for 4.5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah. So Dave Pickerel was there before, and he just got really busy. And one of the people that was with that program had come to Huber because Ted had been instrumental in helping them get off the ground when they first started that project. And so I just gave him a tour, and he said, oh my gosh, we're having trouble with the fermenters, and we ferment in wood. I'm like, oh my gosh, I did that at Limestone Branch. Yeah, you might want to try this or this. So he's like, you need to come out, and told Steve Bayshore, the director of trades there, he's like, I met this person, and can we have her come out to kind of see what's going on? And I asked Ted, I was like, can I have a couple days? Because I was distilling 6 days a week. Can I have a couple days to go out to Mount Vernon and do this. He's like, no. And I'm like, okay. Well. And he's like, no, he goes, you need 4 or 5 days. He said, I'll cover for you. He said, you're going to get out there. You're going to love it, Lisa. Sure enough, I was, I was at the right place at the right time. And we got yields up 53%. And
wow.
And shifted the quality, shifted the way that the distillate was coming off. And a lot of stuff that I'd learned at Limestone Branch, right? Because we'd been, Steve had these wood fermenters that we used. That way people could get their head around,
Sure.
what it was like to ferment in wood and distill in that little 150-gallon, hand hammered copper pot still. I mean, some girls like jewelry, and then just give me a little copper pot still thing.
We know the way of your heart now, right? So you've been involved in a lot of different places. You've had your hands on a lot of different projects and a lot of different whiskeys. And I'm sure there's people out there that had no idea where all you had been. So that's really, I wanted you to share that so people know your experience and know what you've done and where you've been. So that's pretty impressive. So we're at the end of round 1 here. So what I'll do is final thoughts on the rye that's aged in with the American oak. Matt, what do you think?
I didn't know what to expect going into this simply because I'd never had it and never really heard of anyone who had it before. And I am very pleasantly surprised. This is really great. It drinks a lot in a good way. I think it drinks a lot older than the age statement and a lot hotter than the proof statement for those that like a little bit more trousers on their whiskey. So
I love that.
I think this is I'm really, really liking this, really enjoying it.
Yeah, I have a feeling that bottle is not going to hang around at the Bourbon Life studios.
No, I
have a feeling it's going to be going home with Matt tonight. So,
like you said, if it's a hot day, drop it. I was so surprised this summer. Here, I've worked with the program for 3.5 years, and when I dropped an ice cube in it this summer, I'm like, why haven't I done this before? This is amazing. I really like it.
Yeah, like I said, the spiciness of the rye is there. Initially, you get that sweetness though as well. A little bit of that black tea, but not the drying effect with the tannins or anything. I really, really enjoy this, Lisa. This is a really, really nice rye. So I really enjoy it. So with that said, we'll wrap up this first session. We'll get a word from our sponsor and we'll be right back with some more with Lisa Wicker with Widow Jane. So everybody sit tight and we'll be right back. Hey, Bourbon Lifers. When you're out hunting for those hard to find bottles or just enjoying the distilleries of Central Kentucky, you're going to work up an appetite. And when it's time to refuel, we suggest that you visit our good friends Rebecca and Eric Burnworth at the Stave Restaurant. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, close to Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, the Stave Restaurant is just off the beaten path, nestled on the banks of Glens Creek. Chef Jonathan Sanning prepares amazing food each day featuring an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. You can take our word for it, the food alone is worth the trip to the Stave. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. And you can even purchase bottles of bourbon to take home with you while you're there. Make sure to follow the Stave on Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky, or visit them online at thestavekentucky.com to stay up to date on everything that's going on. The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise, right here in the heart of bourbon country. All right, everybody, welcome back for round 2 of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me again, as always, is my co-host, Matt, the joint host. Matt, the joint host.
We've been over this. I am co-host at best.
You are my Troy Aikman to my, what's his name? Gosh, I can't remember his name now, the sports. Anyway, you know what I'm saying, right?
Smith?
No, I can't remember what the guy's name is now. He's a famous broadcaster with Troy Aikman. They do football all the time, and now I'm drawing a blank on his name. So, and I've not even had that much whiskey tonight, Matt. I mean,
maybe that's the problem.
I was going to say your memory may come back.
That's what it is. I think the more, I get those synapses, they slow down. See, they're going too fast right now, and nothing's getting through because it's all jumbled. So I need to drink a little bit, slow down the firing there of the synapses, and the brain's going to function properly again. So, and it's going to hit me in like 20 minutes, and I'll yell out his name like, oh, it's so-and-so. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you advance warning that that's going to happen at some point when it happens. But Joe Buck, is that his name? Joe Buck, that's his name, right? He's a sports announcer. Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. I think that's who it is. So anyway, moving on. Matt, you want to tell everybody again who we have with us if they're just tuning in?
Yeah, of course. Joining us for session number 2 is Lisa Wicker, the lead distiller from Widow Jane. She is back for another round. And before we do what we always do, which is forget to talk about what we're drinking, Lisa, why don't you go ahead and let us and all our listeners know what we've got going on for session or round number 2.
As I said in the first session, I'm so grateful that you picked the ryes first, because sometimes I have a tendency when we talk too much during these things to like forget to talk about them. This is the Oak and Applewood. So it's the same process as the American Oak, only we use Applewood staves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, from the same cooperage in Minnesota. I'd love to repatriate this because there's so many orchards in New York, but so far I can't find an orchard that regularly harvests their trees. And so when that happens, we'll change that. But the Applewood staves we get out of Minnesota are so beautiful. I need to be sure that I can match that.
Sure.
With New York, but yeah, same process. We select the barrels, we blend the barrels so that they're balanced. People are always surprised on this one because sometimes the apple's really subtle. It comes across more as a baked kind of apple, like like an apple dumpling kind of thing, or apple pie, or baked apple. We sell a lot of this as a cocktail base when back in the old days when bars were open.
Yeah. Back in the good old days.
Back in the good old days. We just opened all this up to New England. It's all getting, but the distribution on this is really taken off as well. But this one, keep revisiting this one, because this one, my plans for this one are migrating a little bit. But
very nice, Matt. What are you getting over there? I see you already hitting on it. So what are you picking up on that?
The nose isn't as pronounced as the American Oak. I don't know. I guess I'm not familiar with anything ever having an Applewood stave in it, so I don't know if there's something I should be looking for on the nose.
Apples, man. Come on, apples. What are you talking about?
Actually, very much like apple brandy, because apple brandy doesn't necessarily hit you in the face with the apple.
Right, right. That's what I was going to say, because we had Spirits of French Lick on.
Oh, yeah, Alan.
We had Alan and Jolie on about a month or so ago, and we had their Hoosier apple brandy.
Yes.
So that was really good. I don't know that there's a similarity here, but yeah, I mean, I was expecting, it's going to be apples. It's like, no, this is really just like a nice whiskey. I mean, it's different. So yeah, I kind of saw this one. I'm thinking Applewood. Okay, so I should maybe detect that sweetness or more appley, but like Matt said, it's I don't really pick that up on the nose. So it does seem sweet. So I don't know if that's maybe coming more from that Applewood. It does seem like there's a different type of sweetness than what I was picking up on the rye, but this is the same mash bill. Everything's the same, right? So gotcha. And I forgot to say these are both 91 proof too, right? So is that right? Okay. Matt, what else you getting over there?
So I'm starting to pick up more spice now.
Yeah, it'll open up after. Yeah. Revisit in about 10 minutes too. It'll start to open.
More spice. I'm starting to get more baking spice.
Gotcha.
Yeah, like a little bit of like cardamom and clove. A couple of things I really enjoy in the nose of a bourbon or a rye.
It's like Thanksgiving in a glass. You get all those nice baking spices, like a pumpkin pie or something like that. Lisa, what about you? What do you in terms of
unsweet cinnamon? Unsweet. Last year on the road, I was in Maryland for 3 days, visiting accounts, and just on happenstance, one of the bartenders, she and I were kind of joking around, and we ended up making Boilermakers with this and hard cider.
Really? That's funny. But I could see that now that you say that, because it was funny because with the first, the American Oak, I get that kind of a typical, I don't want to say typical, but you get that rye spiciness, but then you got a lot of sweetness on the end of it. And with this one, I don't get that sweetness. This one has more of of the spiciness. And now that you say unsweet cinnamon, that makes perfect sense, because my tongue is still tingling. And there's not that lingering sweetness like there was with that American oak. So very nice. This is more, when I think of a 95.5 well, whatever that mash bill might be, when I think of a very high rye whiskey, this is kind of the finish that I think about.
Yeah,
more.
it's definitely got a little more green tannin kind of finish in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Yeah. So Lisa, you talked a little bit about yourself earlier, which was great. So everybody got an idea of who you are and where you've been and all the experience you had. It's funny you mentioned Steve, because he's actually going to be on the show in November. So we're excited that we're going to have.
If you want me to tell a couple stories on him, I can do that.
Yeah, we might have to have you call in here a little.
That's right. Yeah, we'll figure that out and have.
Yeah. You're not filming him because he might turn red, but we had some crazy times there. So some good memories.
I bet. So, and one thing I was going to say at the very beginning, and I forgot. I thought I saw somewhere. Did it say you were originally from Bloomington? Is that right?
Yep.
So which is it, IU or UK? I'm curious to know.
Don't make me go there.
Go there. Yeah.
There's some Kentucky relatives that will, it's always IU. It has to be IU. But if Kentucky's playing somebody like, when IU's rivals, absolutely UK, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, that's good. We'll take that. That's an acceptable answer. I usually, especially when we get Indiana folks on, I like to put them on the spot to see where the loyalties lie.
It's hard growing up in Indiana too. My mom was such an avid basketball fan. Even when I was a little girl, I remember jumping up and down on the sofa and breaking the sofa.
Yeah, I mean,
when I got married and moved away from there, I thought, because I was like a medium basketball fan, not like a crazed one, and I was like crazed everywhere else.
If you understand basketball, Indiana, Louisville, Kentucky, I mean, the fans, pretty crazy people. So my dad's 76 years old, and he'll have to get up and leave the room and walk around the house and pace, and occasionally he'll throw a pillow here and there and stomp his feet. So it's hilarious to sit around and watch him watching a basketball game.
That's awesome. Some of my son's memories, because we didn't live in Bloomington when he went to college, and he went to IU, and when my mother passed away, part of her eulogy, all the grandkids wrote something. He was like, "Yeah, drinking Coors with grandma, doing my laundry, watching IU basketball."
Oh, that's great.
So, I'd rather watch with grandma than my friends, if I wasn't at the game myself. But, yeah,
definitely. So, tell us a little bit, if you would, about Widow Jane itself, the distillery. You guys are in Red Hook, right? New York, or I guess it's Brooklyn. Yeah. Well,
we're in a funny little neighborhood. So the Lower Manhattan comes down, and Red Hook, we have an amazing view, like a block from the distillery. We have this amazing there's this pier, there's an amazing open view of the Statue of Liberty, of Lower Manhattan. But wow. Red Hook itself was an old fishing, it was full of longshoremen and warehouses and, lots of families mixed with commerce, right? And so Red Hook is it's still kind of a village. I've told people, like, oh my gosh, how are you adjusting to New York, after Bardstown? I'm like, it really, the gossip travels faster in Red Hook than it, because we're going to expand the distillery. I'm going to build a larger distillery in Brooklyn. And my boss is like, let's keep that under wraps for a little bit. And I go to the corner bar and go in for a beer, and the bartender, she's like, oh my gosh, I heard you're building a big distillery.
Yeah, that's where you go to get the news on your distillery, and your job is other places.
Yeah. So, so it's interesting. I mean, there's certainly a sense of community. There's no high rises in Red Hook. We're on the waterfront. It's definitely got its own charm.
So now, how long have you been with Widow Jane?
3.5 years. We agreed in the beginning that I would come on as a consultant, because the first thing that Robert Pinasro is my boss, and he ran Bacardi, and he's British and charming, and with the link between finding my name through Mount Vernon, he called me and he's like, I need somebody to oversee this project in Brooklyn. I'm like, I'm not moving. So we agreed that, because at first I told him no. And then I walked back into my living room and there's a half a bottle of Bren, French malt. And Bren's one of the brands in the portfolio, along with Few and Philadelphia Blue Coat, Tequila Ocho, and Mezcal Vago. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's a half a bottle of Bren. I'm like, that's an omen, because it never sat out front. It's always, in my malt whiskey cat section. And it's like, I just blew that. And so he called me back a few weeks later and said, I'm just going to fly up to Bardstown to take you to dinner. I really want to talk to you. And so 10 minutes into dinner, I thought, I'm going to go to work for this guy and we'll make this work. And so we agreed that I'd come on as a consultant at first. And so I spent a year as a consultant, and then they brought me on as director, vice president of distilling for all the brands.
Okay.
And that only lasted about 6 months because I was spending all my time at Widow Jane. And the new project was getting, it looked like that was probably where I was a better fit after building a winery and another distillery. And so we ended up there. And then 2 years ago, November 1st, it'll be 2 years, November 1st, they named me head distiller and president in Widow Jane.
Wow. Very nice. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
You talked about Few, because we had Paul on the show from Few just a few weeks ago. Well, no, probably about 2 months ago, right, Matt? Was that Paul?
It probably has been about a month and a half, 2 months ago.
Yeah, I gotta remember how to pronounce this. It's got that H and it throws me. Paul, let go, right?
Yeah, the H was Paul right after, yeah.
Yeah, and they're right they're in a right outside of Chicago. Is that right?
They're in Evanston.
They're right in.
Yeah, they're in an alley in Evanston. It's great. It's awesome. Yeah. So
that's just funny that you both are in, big cities like that you're distilling. So and I know, I think when we talked to him, they faced a lot of adversity, struggles to get, it was like a stronghold of prohibition, if I remember correctly, I believe. So what kind of challenges and struggles have you faced in terms of, distilling? Because when you look at Bardstown, you get these big rolling expanses. You've got these rick houses that go on for these rolling hills in central Kentucky, and Brooklyn is not rolling hills and rick houses. So how does that work?
Logistics are crazy. Our logistics, because we have cobblestone streets, and you bring semis in, and and so we literally drop. We have to, we get the forklift. Somebody's in the truck. They roll the barrels onto the forklift. We drop them and we roll them across the cobblestones into the warehouse. It's crazy. All hands on deck. Nobody is above rolling barrels.
So you guys,
this call, I can't know it.
So you're warehousing there. I mean, at the on site there.
Yeah. So I've got barrels all over, right? And so most of them are stored outside of New York because of my space. I'm trying to, right now with COVID, we've had to put the other project on hold for a little bit, but I'm bonding that space so I can have some more storage. And so our logistics are crazy. So like, get ready to do, we'll taste the 10-year, but get ready to do like a 10-year blend. And I sit down with my director of operations, Jillian, and I know now where different flavor profiles are coming. So rather just unload a warehouse at one particular distillery, I'll end up with something very unbalanced when we get towards the ends of those barrels. And so we're drawing down from all over. And then, we unload them, and Duncan, our barrel manager, warehouse manager, he brings me samples. He's my first line because he knows. He's like, well, these are low volume, which immediately translates into, the flavor is going to be over the top on those, right? And so he brings me all these little 50 ml bottles all lined up and everything. So he's my first line, and then I do the blending off of those, and it can get crazy because we don't have everything on site.
Right. I'm sure. Yeah. I was wondering about that. I was just like, how in the world in a major city it just strikes me as that it would be very not overwhelmingly difficult, but it would be difficult. I mean, there's a lot of challenges and obstacles
you don't have in Kentucky. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the neighbors, the people that live there, they understand that it's half industrial and half residential, but you get these people, they're laying on the horn, or truck drivers are really getting ready to like slug the other truck driver because they need to get by. And
oh man. So now now Widow Jane, you've been there 3 years, right? So how long has Widow Jane actually been around as a brand?
8 years. Yeah.
8 years. Okay. And it's always been there in New York. So
Yes, it originally was a chocolate factory. The original owner started making chocolate. He had family in the Dominican Republic, and they did beans to bar. So the cacao would come in and they would ferment it there and do the whole processing there. That's where the spirits company, the craft distilling, came out, because he decided they were going to do a rum and a chocolate rum. And that's how the distilling started. And then they got into that. So started sourcing barrels, because as I tell everybody, when you start a craft distillery, you either sell white spirits, or
Right.
you source, or you have more money than God and you can just wait, right? So then, I just remember being at Limestone Branch, and some people were just mean sometimes. They're like, well, if you don't have any whiskey, I'm like, well, whiskey, but you're not going to want to drink this with you, right? But it's like, we're not pretending to be something that we're not,
Right.
We're trying to make really high quality, but if you don't make gin or vodka or moonshine or something, you either have to do that or source. And so for me, I've had the best of all the worlds, right?
Right. You've got to experience everything. You're making your own, but you're also sourcing and blending. So you've gotten to experience all angles.
Yes.
Of that. So you're sourcing, but you're also distilling there on site now, right? So now anything, I think you mentioned when we first got into that American oak, that's still sourced. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And we're laying down rye. We're also laying down our distilling program. I inherited this project and expanded it, but we have a one-of-a-kind open pollinated heirloom corn cross. And It's a cross between Bloody Butcher, which is becoming a common name, especially in whiskey. Jeff the Creed, that's all they distill, right? And
right.
I distilled some at Huber before I had, even before Widow Jane, and then Wapsie Valley is the other corn. And so they had already worked on this project when I came on at first. They'd bought the company, and they had tens of thousands of bushels of this corn, and it was stored, not out in the middle of nowhere. And so they were trying, like, what do we sell it off for feed? I'm like, don't do that, let me go visit it first, right? And so I get to the elevator, and it's immaculate. There is not a gravel out of place, there's no corn out of place. Got Sheriff on the phone and telling him, asking him, how do you want me to how should I evaluate this the way it is in these silos? And the corn was so sound, it was so good. It's like, don't destroy this, we need to make whiskey out of it. So we had to work fast. We ended up doing some trial runs at 2 different distilleries in Kentucky. I was like, fortunately for me, I knew some grain haulers and things. And so, I was able to pull in some favors and say, hey, Jeff, can we? Yeah. And so I've got a good story about this too. So when the distilleries, they're running it for us, and they call me and they're like, what's the matter? And they're like, well, the whiskey's not bad, but we just don't know what's going on. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have just talked this client into doing this, and we've spent all this money. I'm like, and so I'm asking, like, do you want me to stop the trucks? He's like, no. And so I call Sheriff, and I'm like, you got to go with me, right? And so, it's great because I tend to drive and he tends to talk, right?
Yeah.
We're in my truck, and I'm like, I am melting down, right? I'm like, I can't believe, I'm thinking all the worst case scenarios. What am I going to do? Am I going to just, how are we going to work this out? We get in there, and they're all waiting for us in the lab. And I go in and I taste it, and I'm like, this is delicious. This is heirloom corn.
Nice.
Well, we knew it wasn't bad. We just didn't know what.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so fortunately for me, that's pretty much all I've ever distilled. I've done some yellow dent, but Limestone Branch, we had an heirloom white. At Huber, we had an heirloom white, blue, and red, and then consulting clients, the same thing. And so I had a little bit of experience with it before we got there. And so then since then, we distill now. I go back to Kentucky now with COVID, not so much, but and distill at Castle and Key. It's another thing. Boss is like, we probably, I don't know if we want to tell everybody about this. And then we get 9 ladies in Red Hook that have come to visit New York, and they're like, oh, we decided to visit distillery. We're from Kentucky, and we saw your Widow Jane barrels at Castle and Key. Like, okay. And I've had a couple of people on podcasts going, am I allowed to ask about all the Widow Jane barrels I saw getting rolled across the park? And said, yes, you are. So, because I cook heirloom corn very differently than a standard mash bill. And so they use my protocol. our corn, and then I'm on site when I need to be for making some of the distilling decisions on low and high wines and
Gotcha.
and those sorts of things, right? And they're great about calling and so we ran some rye this last year. That was a lot of fun. Same thing. I cook rye a little bit differently.
I just want to make sure I get it. So are you all distilling on site there too, though, in New York? Are you okay?
No,
all right.
We're just too little to do what we need to do to get the new distillery built. So the idea is, I used to say this, and now with COVID, I don't say this anymore, but I was saying I wanted to get it repatriated, everything to New York in under 3 years, right?
Right.
And, the architects are finished. The engineering's all done. We were ready to break ground April 1st.
Yeah.
And COVID.
Yeah. And then dun.
Yeah. And so we had to make some decisions. We thought we might go ahead and go forward, and they changed our code consultant, and all of a sudden the code consultant's like, no, he's pretty much saying everything that the previous code consultant had done for 18 months wasn't right. It's like we started seeing the writing on the wall, and it'd be better to hold this up because we're going to be in some trouble here. So we decided to hold on to that project. But so it's all, it's take one day at a time. But right now, I don't know how we'd fit it in. One of the people on staff said that today. Is like, oh my gosh, if you were still like building the distillery right now with everything else going on.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. Yeah, that'd be kind of crazy. So you got your heirloom corn. Now with your rye, you're laying down rye. Are you sourcing that locally in New York, or can you find, or do they even have, can you find it there?
I'm just starting to I just got some Danko rye that was actually acceptable. I'm going to jump back to the heirloom corn. We grow it in 3 states. We didn't plant this year because of COVID, but we had for 2 years in a row, we had the largest heirloom corn crop for whiskey in the United States.
Wow.
Peterson Farms in Kentucky.
Okay.
They had approached me when I was building the distillery in Bardstown and said they wanted to do a project. They'd had a lot of craft distillers approach them, but they knew I'd had a little bit of experience with heirloom corns, and they said, we really want to try this because they grow for makers in Sazerac and they grow in Nelson County and Marion County, Nelson County, and Washington County. And lucky for me, Bernard Peterson's daughter lives in New York. And when I called him, he's like, well, actually, my wife and I and my brother and sister-in-law, we're all going to be out there in a couple of weeks. I'm like, well, come see me. I really, want you to do this project. And 10 minutes in the distillery, because it's like, it's funny, you cross over the threshold of the distillery, it doesn't matter where it is, right? And
right.
And so 10 minutes, and he goes, I got to talk to my family, but I think we're going to agree to grow your corn. And they worked with the agronomist a little bit at UK, their staff agronomist, Scott, and we broke all kinds of yield records. And
very nice.
So very proud of that. And then upstate New York, and so that corn all goes to Castle and Key to get distilled. And then upstate New York is a family that used to be dairy farmers. And needless to say, the dairy industry is, not healthy. And so they had gotten into heirloom grains, and so they grow our corn that comes to New York, and they just finally supplied me with some Danko rye just 2 days ago. It's delicious, so I can't wait to distill some of it. But
nice.
And then Pennsylvania, we still have a seed corn farmer there that does a lot of work. Same thing. He used to be a dairy farmer and got into heirloom grains for breweries and distilleries, and he grows our seed corn. We grow seed corn upstate New York because all of that seed corn then comes to Kentucky when we need it. But I've got it. It's a one-of-kind crop, and so I've got to grow seed corn in a couple of places because of hail, locust, and acts of God, right? So, I got to make sure I got seed corn. Yeah. So
you just never know, right? You just never know. Well, I tell you what, we're at the end of round 2 here, Lisa. So we'll close out this round with some final thoughts on the rye that's aged with the Applewood staves. Matt, what are your final thoughts on this one?
As it's been sitting a little bit longer, I'm picking up more of the apple on the nose, like you were saying, Lisa, to let it sit and come back to it a little bit more. And it's not that sweet apple, and it's not a Granny Smith apple, which is sometimes a green apple. I'll get that in a rye. It's like you're saying, it's more of a baked apple, like a soft, not the sweet, but just the essence of the flavor of apple without the sweetness. And I also get a little bit of
the nose is very apple blossom after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that opens up. And then, I noticed for me when I went back and took another taste, that it actually has opened up to sweetness to me because initially I said I'm getting a lot of the spice. It's very spicy, the cinnamon that we talked about. But now that I'm going back, I'm actually picking up more sweetness off of it. It's like it's opened up and become a little bit sweeter, like the first one that we did, the American oak. But yeah, I am really, when I see the age and I think, 2 years old, I'm wondering what this is going to taste like. Again, this one to me this is a really good rye. Really enjoy this. Both of these have been well beyond my expectations, Lisa. So this is really good stuff. Matt, what do you think?
Mark, I couldn't agree with you more.
When COVID passes, when I'm back in Bardstown, you need to come sit on my front porch and we'll drink some more.
Sounds like a deal.
That's a deal, because in Lexington, we're only like an hour at the most away from
down to Fiji. Boom.
That's right. Yep. Get on that Bluegrass Parkway and we'll be there. We could be there in no time, Lisa.
Next door neighbor is Jim Beam and he's with Kentucky Owl now, and so, yeah, it gets, the front porch stuff can get.
We'll just make the rounds down your street then.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll take a quick break, get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back in just a minute with more with Lisa Wicker with Widow Jane. Everybody just sit tight and we'll be right back.
Pinhooking is an old Kentucky term for purchasing young thoroughbreds, holding them until they mature, and selling them when they are ready to run. Successful pinhooks, much like whiskey, are made on instinct, experience, an appreciation of quality, and a little daring. Pinhook, straight bourbon whiskey.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and final session or round or segment or whatever you want to call it, wherever you're listening tonight or today, just whatever you feel like, Matt, right? And of course, with me, as always, is my co-host, Matt. Matt, how you doing for the third session segment round?
Oh, Mark, I am good. I'm doing great. And, as listeners, you can call our session segments, rounds, whatever you want. It's like the famous joke, call me whatever you want, just don't call me late for dinner.
There you go. That's right. Just make sure you call us when it's time to drink bourbon. Just call us, right?
That is right. If you've got the time, we got the place, or maybe it's the other way around.
I know you've got to be doing pretty good tonight because we've had two ryes back to back.
We have. This has been
a
great episode for me.
Yeah, Matt's thrilled. I know he is, and it's been. And I hate to keep saying I'm surprised, but
okay.
Because I'm really surprised at how good both of those were for being such young ryes, Lisa. You should be very proud of yourself.
I'm proud of my team. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Some of them were there already and have been there for a long time, and we've hired a few other. But I'll tell you what, I put my team up against anybody. Like I said, we do all of our labels in-house. We do all of the blending. We're laying down whiskey. We've got people cross-trained. So even the office manager, she knows how to come in and turn the boiler on super early in the morning so that the distillers don't have to be there extra long. Cross-trained everybody, right? And not everybody can do everyone's job fully, but my bottling team, when I was making wine, the couple that I worked for in Kentucky, she's like, oh my gosh, your personality changes on bottling day. And I said, yeah, because you can undo 10 years of grape growing, 2 years of winemaking in 15 minutes. You can blow it, right? And I said, there's so many details and things. And my bottling team, oh my gosh, because we don't chill filter. One of the things I was first tasked with was the bottles were a little, had a little too much flock and stuff in them when I first started. And so, I was challenged with don't chill filter, but make sure there's no flock. And guess what? The proof's at 91. We all know the magic number's 92. That. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired before I get hired, because it took me a while to figure it out. One night in the middle of the night, like, I know what we're going to do here. I borrowed something out of winemaking, but my team, they packed me up for this trip. I've got a bunch of stuff. I've blended all over the country. I've blended in Los Angeles. I've blended at DC because they'll overnight me samples. Because because the trucks, since the barrels aren't on site, and then the trucks come in if I'm not there. Yeah, I travel with a plastic graduated cylinder in my and, yeah, so we've learned to adapt and yeah,
You do what you got to do, right? You got to, that's the way it is.
It all comes so far. Sienna, one of our distillers, she was working in the office when I started there, and we started having these conversations about grain and yeast and everything. And because she was a baker and her roommates were bakers, and I asked her one day, I needed to increase the distilling staff, and I said, "Are you interested in learning to distill? Because you can't teach people enthusiasm about that stuff,
Right.
And they either have it or they don't." And she's just tremendously talented, right? And she's been on fire, and we just added another distiller. And like I said, our barrel manager, Duncan's resume fell on my desk, and he had come from Antarctica. He'd done some tours in Antarctica.
Wow.
Yeah, we've got quite the diverse personalities on our team. But he had grown up in Michigan and gone to school in Chicago, fell in love with bourbon, and decided to go work at Woodford Reserve after he finished school. And so he was on the night fermentation crew, right? Distillation crew, and then decided he was going to go to Fuel Systems in Antarctica and did 2 or 3 rounds of that. And then it was his girlfriend's turn, because she's in fashion, to come to New York. And so, so Duncan already understood, had a good knowledge of what was going on. And then Jillian and Michelle were already with the program, and they've been very accommodating to me, changing lots of the things going on there. And
sure.
And Raph and Carlos and Kevin, our bottling crew, we're on a skeleton crew right now because of COVID, and everybody's decided they'd rather roll up their sleeves and work extra hard than, get everybody exposed to more people from outside right now. And so, a tight-knit little group, but I can't do it without them for sure. So.
Well, that's great. Well, you guys should be very proud, because especially those 2 ryes, I'm very, very impressed with both of those, Lisa. I mean, really, very, very, very good ryes. So moving on to this 3rd session round segment, you want to tell everybody what we're going to be drinking on this one?
Yeah, this is our flagship 10-year-old. When I started this, one of the first things I was tasked with was in cleaning up polishing the product and keeping the age statement at 10 years. And the source whiskey at the time had gone from Indiana to Kentucky. I should remember that. And or Kentucky to Indiana. And so we started sourcing from Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, so that I could keep the age statement on there all the time. So I'm able to, adjust what's coming and going. The 5-barrel small batch, I was allowed to pick whatever I wanted. And since we all know there's no definition for small batch, right?
Right.
5 we finally settled in at 5, because it seemed like I could get some consistency, but then also some variations from batch to batch, just not unlike a single barrel, right? So that not every batch was cookie cutter, but there was certainly some common denominators. One of the things that we do is our water. Our water is it's crazy. So you get in there and it's like, okay, limestone water. Well, the reason people love limestone water is because makes great healthy fermentations, and there's no iron in it, and iron turns whiskey black. So that's why we like limestone water. But Widow Jane was not using it to cook the mash with; they were using it to proof the whiskey down.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's so crazy, right? And so. Yeah, and what calcium causes flock, right? So you just, oh my gosh, your head's just ready to explode. So, but it does make a difference, People that one of the first things is like, is this a gimmick? And then if you'll let's just say there's a very famous green bottle French mineral water, and when I broke the water recipe, I had the water recipe broken down on our water, and it's almost identical.
Is it really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I tell people we don't have a cast strength whiskey, because we have to get this water in our whiskey because it makes some of our notes pop. It's amazing. There's certain characteristics that come out in our whiskey, and it's because of the water. But we have this cave upstate, and I have visited it many times because I'm stickler for quality, right? And you go in, it's under lock and key. The Widow Jane name is part of the folklore of the area of Rosendale. And
Okay.
the Widow Jane mine you can actually go to. It's part of the Snyder property, the Century House. It's a historic site, and you can actually walk into the Widow Jane mine. But we don't extract our water from there for obvious reasons, because it's open to the elements and everything. So our mine is on the back side. The hill's like this and like this. Our hill is actually an iron mountain, which means they store like really famous historic documents in there.
Yeah, there you go.
Like somebody said that the Magna Carta is in there. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but
Wow.
yeah, like the Declaration of Independence. Apparently, these sites exist all over the United States, and they're these secure places to. Anyway, so the Widow Jane mine comes in like this, and our mine comes in like this. I had the geological engineers like map it all out, and the so ours is under lock and key for obvious reasons, right?
Sure.
A door and everything, but you go in there and it's dark and your eyes have to adjust, and the ceiling's dripping, and it smells so incredible. It smells like fresh rainwater hitting dirt in the spring.
Yeah, nice.
It's
Very
so
nice.
amazing. Yeah, and it really is. You hear about terroir and whiskey, and once you have an opportunity to visit there, and then you're like drinking this, and it's like it's just that water is ridiculous. And so it's we have it tested on a regular basis. People ask me that. It's like, of course we do, right? I tried to get ahead of ingredient labeling too, because one of these days they're going to tell us we're going to have to ingredient label on all of our spirits, and so every ingredient that goes into them is going to have to be
listed on there.
Yeah.
So Widow Jane, then the name, that's based on that mine. Is that where
it's the folklore of the area? In fact, we just started like a film series, little short, tiny little few second films about it, because it's like, who was Widow Jane? There's people that say this AJ Snyder that owned the mines, they mined limestone out of it, and then there was a process where they baked it and it made a hardening agent for cement, and so the Rosendale cement was like world famous. And that's the reason we use images of the Brooklyn Bridge, of the Empire State Building, of the base of the Statue of Liberty, the White House, the Washington Memorial. All of those are held together with Rosendale cement. It was hard and so pure. And so then Porter cement came on the market, and Porter cement wasn't as pretty. It's not as strong, but it was a lot less expensive.
Sure.
And so Rosendale cement went out of business, I think, in 1970. So there was this legend. It's like, is Widow Jane, was she AJ Snyder, who owned the mine and was apparently a very crummy person? It's like, was she his mistress? Was the mine Widow Jane mine? Was she his wife? Was she, it's like, so anyway, it's part of the folklore. Everybody's got their own, it's based on some sort of truth.
Gotcha.
Everybody's got their own version of it, right?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, where the name came from. So you get your water from there. So they truck it in, they bring it down?
Get in old like dairy tank trucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's got to be, that's going to add some expense right there when you're trucking your water. You're trucking your water. How far away is this
90
from?
miles and 90 miles and into the city. So they like to come overnight. They like to drive overnight because they want to get back out of the city. So we get our deliveries at 5 a.m. Yeah.
Here's your water for the day. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's crazy. All right. So you're using that. And so now back to this bourbon, obviously you're using the water in there. So this is a blend, you said, of 5 barrels. Is that right?
5 barrels, 3 states.
All right. So each, this is going to sound stupid, but you're saying actually 5 literal barrels, not just like 5 barrels of a batch from
5 literal barrels.
5 literal barrels for each. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm getting that right. So you're talking maybe 1,000 bottles at the most, or less?
Yeah, about that. 600.
So somewhere.
Well, it depends. As this whiskey's getting older, the volumes have been shifting on them dramatically. Our single barrel program, oh my gosh, we get as few as 12 cases out of some of those single barrels.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too here in a minute, about single barrel stuff and how you guys do that. So now I forgot, Matt. See, I got sidetracked. She said single barrel, man. I'm just like, oh
yeah,
wow,
that's right. It's like buzzword.
my head just exploded, and I completely forgot where I was going. So since I forgot, Lisa, let's talk about the single barrel then.
Yeah, single barrel program. Another program I inherited. It's all Indiana juice. It it was a 12-year-old single barrel program. And then all of a sudden, all the barrels turned 13. And so, gosh, I don't know if my boss is going to listen to this or not. I told him, I said, since it's turning 13, instead of calling it the 12-year, let's call it Unlucky 13.
Oh.
And he goes, because it's Widow Jane, it's kind of dark, right?
Right.
Lisa, right. Not calling anything unlucky. Lucky 13. And so, the juice turned 13. And so those proofs, the 12-year-old was all at 99 proof. And so these proofs range from 91 to 99. And the reason why is because, as we know, sometimes whiskey gains proof and sometimes it loses proof. Right. And so I was like freaked out because I had all these barrels that were too low. And so rather than drop them all to 91, I said, why don't we just drop them so that I can get some mine water in them, and I'll drop them to the closest proof that I can get enough mine water in to influence the profile on it. And so that's why they range, and people have really appreciated that. I think they just appreciate the honesty about why we're doing that and how we're doing that. And and our single barrel program, I released 100 of those barrels last year. I released another 100 this year. And they're a hot commodity.
Yeah, I'd say so. Definitely. No doubt. So I just remembered what I was going to ask. We were talking about the blend of the 5 barrels and blending those together. So when you're blending those, are you blending those? And Matt, this is usually your question. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in, taking that.
You can have it. It's all right.
All right, I appreciate that. So do you blend to a specific profile, or are you just taking the 5 barrels that you think are the best for that particular batch, and you're putting those together and letting those barrels decide and dictate where you go?
Kind of both.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I get all of these and I just 2 days ago, I blended four of these batches. And so you get all of these samples. I get more samples than I need. Duncan gives me the rundown on them, say this. And I'm like, okay. And so I can start setting those up. And you'll set them up, and sometimes you'll just nail that first batch. It's like, this is great, because I'm always looking for 2 things with that. I'm trying to find the dark stone fruit in it, and I'm trying to find the baking spice, which is Widow Jane. Gotcha. And then you get down to the 3rd batch and nothing matches. And so then you got to start, it's like, but the first batch, then you got to start, and you got to, okay, until you get them all balanced, right? And sometimes they won't, and you got to just bring more barrels in, you just have to bring more samples, and you set those samples aside. It's like, no, these aren't lining up, because sometimes you'll get what I call a stinker,
right.
That it just doesn't, and I don't mean because it's a bad barrel, it just doesn't fit anywhere. And so,
sure.
And so sometimes, my team, they know me well enough now to know that I'll be avoiding that barrel for a while.
So
going out of there, Lisa. So you got to figure out where that's got to go, because that takes some work, right?
Sure. Okay. So going to the blending, because we had Sean Josephs on the show from Pinhook, and Sean has some experience in the wine industry and talked about blending the barrels, and kind of doing it more from almost like his experience from the wine industry. So you coming from the wine industry, do you find that really has kind of guided you through this process of blending, that's kind of the way you go? Absolutely.
The best gift that, the man that trained me to make wine is just a brilliant guy. Right. But a couple things that I took away from there that I live by every single day. He's like, don't just drink your own juice. You're going to start to like it. Don't get out of it. Right.
Right.
And, you got to always be your own best critic. And he allowed me to start tinkering with blending. We had a rosé that wasn't what he wanted. And so he's like, would you just get in? And I'd been there a couple of years. He's like, would you just get in the lab and just start messing with this stuff? Right. And it worked, and it was merchantable, and worked with the all the ladies in the tasting room and everything. So you make, because you're always trying to make a very merchantable product, right? You want to make what the customers want. And so because of the way we were doing it, we could kind of be responsive to what, because he already had a really well-established line of wine that was really well received. But there's some products around the edges that he was always tinkering with, but that was the best gift he could have given me. And then when I started with Steve Beam, even, because like I said, we used to help each other out in the evenings. And so that was some of my biggest surprise, because with whiskey, with spirits like wine, and okay, I want to enhance this note. So you just add a little bit more of that wine to that. With spirits, you can like totally negate the nose. You can like start to blend and think, okay, if I add some more of this, this is what I want. And Ted Huber had me do a spiced rum for him, and he wanted vanilla on the nose and vanilla on the palate. And so, 700 gallons at a time, you're standing there, hands as wine. Nice. That was a fun project, but it took me 4 sources of vanilla to have vanilla on the nose and vanilla on the palate.
Wow.
Yeah.
But obviously you've been able to take that experience and the knowledge and the mentorship that you had, and obviously you've done a great job with what you're doing. Going back to that, we didn't see, we talked about what we're drinking, but we haven't talked about what we actually taste. See, it happens. So Matt, what do you pick it up on this one?
It's funny, Lisa, that you had mentioned stone fruit and baking spice as your flavor profile, because as I was sitting here smelling this, I couldn't get past stone fruit. I get a lot of dark fruits, a lot of cherry, plum, a little bit of raisin, just really nice dark stone fruit. And then when I taste it, I get the baking spice and some chocolate, and it's sweet too. There's some caramel, and I have to admit it kind of tastes like a Twix.
I've heard chocolate and caramel a lot. Yeah, I did a blending with somebody today over like Zoom, and I heard that. In fact, they named one of the bottles chocolate, one of them caramel.
Yeah, it has the chocolate and the caramel, and then how you say the baking spice. So a Twix has that little bit of cookie cracker or whatever is in there. To me, that's the kind of the best. And when I sometimes when I look at things, I try to bring a lot of the flavors or tastes or aromas together into a complete food or dish that I've had before, rather than kind of looking at the separate parts of it. And to me, this is
there you go. We're drinking liquid Twix here.
Yeah.
This is I can see that, man. This is really, really good as well. At least now this one's won quite a few awards as well. Is that correct? This one
we have. Yeah, we've been really fortunate. I released a 14-year-old last year too. That was a 20 barrel blend, and we got picked one of the top 20. Rob Report picked us in one of the top 20 whiskeys of the century so far. Yeah, wow. Whiskey Advocates given us some good marks, and we've been really fortunate. We've done well.
Well, it's a reflection of you and your experience and your team, obviously. But that's again something to be very proud of. And I didn't mention it on the rye also, but I noticed you guys won a gold medal with the that Applewood. I think you won a gold medal at San Francisco, and then also got rated really high with the Ultimate Spirits Challenge as well. So we had Paul Picoult on the show several months ago, which was really because I really didn't know much about Paul, and he was a great guest. Just absolutely loved Matt and I both could just sit and listen to the guy for forever. I mean, he was a great guest, and really enjoyed getting to listen to him and just share some whiskey and listen to his knowledge. So it was a lot of fun. So but you obviously some great stuff here. So what about you, Lisa? I mean, it's your stuff, your product. So what do you get about the nose and the palate?
Always mid palate, some old leather, a little bit of sweet tobacco, the stone fruit, baking spice, and mineral water. Definitely there's a minerality in it, especially like 2/3 of the way through the palate that
kind of stands out. So, but now, so you did say this is a blend of the Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so some of the juice, let's see how much I can tell the story without letting everything. Some of the juice, when I first started, they had purchased some of it, and then I was able to go and purchase some more, and it was really nice, clean, simple whiskey, right? So great blending whiskey. And because, you don't want everything over the top.
Sure.
Those over the top elements to blend in with some of those simple, elegant, easy to drink whiskeys. And this whiskey wasn't drinking as old as age statement on it. drinking, HM was 10, was drinking like a 4 to 6 year old whiskey. And here's a hint. If you need to know something, go to the gift shop and ask the people working the gift shop.
Oh. That's good to know.
What about this, and that, and they're like, oh yeah, well, okay. Now we know, now I know, I know what I need to know. I don't know any big secret, but because it's what I suspected, but we moved those barrels into a lower profile warehouse, and they have accelerated. It's like they were waiting to get out of the gate, and it's been crazy to the point where now some days it's like, whoa, stop. Yeah, they've got so much personality now. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
They picked up color like crazy. They went from kind of pale straw to this, to this gorgeous amber. And yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to comment when I poured my drink, and now I've already finished my drink.
I'm sitting here with Mark. I'll go ahead and piggyback your point. I'm sitting here with the bottle that we have, and the color on this is like dark.
Yeah, it is.
Amber, and it's a mahogany. It's a really, really pretty, really dark color.
And it's 91 proof as well, right? So I mean, it is not. So you're not talking about straight out of the barrel, uncut, 130 proof whiskey, which you'd expect to be really dark. Of course, it's 10 years old, but
it's as old as 13.
Sure, right, yeah. So you get older than the 10-year-old in there as well. But yeah, that was the one thing that really impressed me at first. I was just like, wow, this is a very nice looking darker. Dark whiskey. And I hate to, again, it goes to back those preconceived notions. 2-year-old rye, you think, oh, this is going to be grain forward. Obviously tonight, proven wrong on that one. But just looking at the darkness of it, you can't always judge a whiskey by the color. But this one, it really, the color just matches the bourbon. I mean, it's a really well-rounded, very nice bourbon. Like Matt said, it's a liquid Twix.
I'll take it. Yeah.
That's good. Well, believe it or not, we are already at the end of round 3. That just went really fast. That was
too quickly. We'll need to have another podcast from your front porch.
Yes, we are mobile. I mean,
I can't wait till this over. I have so many people I just want to come to us drink whiskey.
Well, we'll have to do that sometime, definitely, Lisa. So before we get out of here, can you just tell everybody where they can find your products right now? Where's it available?
We are in 43 states and 20 countries.
Okay. So pretty much anybody listening to us should hopefully be able to.
Available in Kentucky. The ryes are available in Kentucky. I know that we had some of the vaults, the 14-year-old. I don't know where to be quite frank, I don't know where all the 15-year-olds going. We
will give you our address, so at least a bottle or 2, we won't know where those end up.
Or better yet, Lisa, I have a feeling you're going to be driving right through Lexington tomorrow.
Driving through Lexington tomorrow, yeah.
See, there you go. We solved the problem right there.
Right. So. We'll save on postage.
Yes.
So in terms of like social media and things, where can people find more information about Widow Jane?
Widow Jane is on Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah. That's our our most prominent place. I'm on Instagram. Widow Jane's on Instagram.
Okay, great. And people can always follow you there and get more information, stay up to date with things that are going on. So, all right. Well, Lisa, before we wrap it up, anything else you want to tell our listeners? Anything exciting coming up for you guys? I mean, I know obviously your project to expand is on hold at this point, but anything else coming up that you'd like to share that you can let our listeners know?
Oh gosh, anything. I don't know that there's anything in particular. I want to thank you for supporting us. Like I said, we never dreamed we'd be in the spot that we're in right now, and it's amazing. So, released a couple rounds now of a maple syrup barrel finish. We work with a Crown maple syrup from upstate New York.
Yeah.
The Decadence, that's taken off and done really well. And yeah, we call it COVID comfort food. Yeah. Malts was so well received last year. Forbes was really kind about it, and Rob Report and everybody. And then, the 15, I'm just get up every morning and, okay, God, how did this happen? Thank you very much. And let's get on with this day. It's like,
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great. Well, Lisa, we really appreciate you being on the show. And again, I know some technical difficulties earlier this week. Yeah. No, hey, you know what? We all have. And here's the thing: we're here. We're an hour and a half in now, and my camera is still working. So I'm just thrilled that that my setup, I did not have the technical difficulties that I was anticipating at the very beginning. So
the podcast thing said, get on. It's, I read through the first instructions and then I didn't read any further. And it said, just be sure you get on 10 minutes before. I'm like, oh, well, I've got that. 15 minutes before. I still couldn't get. But then it couldn't give you all the other instructions. Like, oh my gosh, I haven't done any of this.
Oh gosh. Well, we appreciate you being patient and coming back and hanging out with us tonight while you're on the road. You may be the first guest that we've had that's actually like in mid-transit that stopped to actually have a podcast session with us. So we really appreciate that.
Sure. It's actually the third one I've done, going back and forth, not flying anymore, It's
right.
14 hours on the road. So yeah.
Well, good. Matt, before we close it out, anything else you want to add?
Lisa, thank you so much for being on with us tonight and for letting our listeners know all about your past in the industry and your start with winemaking and where that's taken you, and for giving us some really great insight into Widow Jane's past, present, and especially the future and everything we have to look out for. I really, really appreciate your humility and the passion that you bring to the industry and to your products. And it definitely comes through in the glass. So thank you so much for all of that. And to our listeners, thank you all so much out there. We wouldn't be a podcast without your feedback and without you all tuning in. So thank you all so much for that. We really do appreciate it. If you want to drop us a review or drop us a line, you can do that as well. Reach out to us on iTunes or any of the platforms where you get your podcasts, or check out our Facebook group, The Bourbon Lifers, and also The Bourbon Life on Instagram.
Very well said, Matt. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Lisa, again, we appreciate you being with us tonight. We've had a great time. We're definitely going to have to do this again, and maybe, like Matt said, make it into a mobile follow-up from Lisa's front porch in Bardstown.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it very much.
You're very welcome. All right. So thank you all for listening. We really appreciate your support, like Matt said. And you can find us, email us at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram, Facebook. And with that said, I'm going to wrap us up, send us home tonight with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.